Fruity Knitting. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Fiona.
And this is episode 118. So Fruity Knitting is a 90-minute program bringing you knitting inspiration from around the world, as well as extra snippets of travel, history and storytelling that we always hope adds joy to your life and brings a smile to your face. Now, as you can see, I am not in the Offenbach studio back in Germany. I'm in Australia now, and joining me on the couch is my sister Fiona.
It's so great to be here sitting on the couch next to my big sister. It's been 3 years since we've seen each other and at least 10 years since you've been back to Australia, right?
Yeah, it's been a really long time. And I just quickly want to say thank you to our Australian patrons and Australian viewers who recently messaged me with these messages like, welcome home, it's great to have you home. It really made me tear up. I was surprisingly really moved by those messages. So thank you so much for doing that. Now, let me quickly tell you about today's program. Our feature interview is with the UK's premier toy designer, Alan Dart. Alan has been designing toys for over 30 years, bringing out new patterns weekly for the Woman's Weekly and Simply Knitting magazines. And he has a portfolio of over 100 licensed characters. And his own made-up characters, I think, are such a joy to look at and probably also to play with. And Madeline and I filmed this interview back in September last year. So we drove up to his home in the beautiful county of Cumbria, which also happens to be Beatrix Potter country. And Alan has designed several of the Beatrix Potter characters. So he really is one of the best known, most talented and experienced toy designers in the UK. And he was such a joy to interview and spend time with. We spent time with him afterwards, also with his partner, Malcolm Bird, who is an illustrator. That was a lot of fun. And I think you're going to be infected by his enthusiasm and the remarkable attention to detail that he puts into every single toy.
I'm going to share a bit about my knitting journey with you and show you some of the projects I've been working on. I happen to live in one of the most beautiful parts of Australia, the Byron Bay Shire. We've taken a bit of footage to show you around the area, and we're including a brief extreme knitting segment featuring my two eldest daughters, Simba and Leia, doing their crafting.
Yes, they're the little stars of the show. So it is quite an Australian themed program because we've put a fair bit of bush and beach footage in it. But I'm also really delighted to introduce you to a textile artist who's local to this Byron Bay area in our Makers segment. So Robyn Alexander is a mixed media artist who specialises in embroidery and wool felting. And Robyn's been giving workshops around Australia and New Zealand for decades. She's so enthusiastic and passionate, and I'm sure you're going to pick up lots of new ideas from seeing her work. So that's our program, which we hope you really enjoy. And I think a lot of you are just dying to get to know my sister. So we're going to start with Fiona first. She'll tell us a little bit about her knitting history.
I'm Andrea's younger sister. There's 14 years difference. And we have an older sister, Michaela, who you've met on a previous episode. We had the most creative grandma. We called her Mama. She was beautiful and super talented at all things crafting, spinning, knitting, crochet, embroidery, decoupage, fashion design, you name it. She was such an inspiration and a real lady.
Yeah, when Fiona says she's a real lady, let me just give you an example. So she lived in South Australia in quite a remote area, but she would always have her red nails polished and her long hair done in a French roll and, beautiful makeup on, even when she was at the jetty scaling fish and in a dinghy fishing. Like, she always looked gorgeous.
True style.
Yeah.
I'm trying to convince Andrea to do a little segment of her in an upcoming episode. Here's a picture of Mama with Michaela and Andrea when they were little. My sisters had a ball growing up with Mama. She taught them all sorts of skills, particularly knitting. By the time I came along, everyone was rather old and tired. Yeah. The enthusiasm for teaching just wasn't there.
It's true.
I did learn the basics of knitting, casting on, casting off, knit and purl stitch, but there was no coaching through a big, bold project on offer. So mine consisted of teeny tiny blankets done in garter stitch for my teddy bears.
That's cute. I think a lot of people start like that. So it's actually a privilege to have someone close to you who knows everything and who can immediately fix your mistakes.
That's why I love having you here at the moment. When I was in my 20s, I picked up the needles again, inspired by the jumbo knitting needle craze, which promised you could whip up an entire project in a weekend.
Yeah.
I made a few shawls this way. I never followed a pattern. I just chose interesting yarns and made it up as I went along. I sent one to Andrea once, thinking she'd be delighted. But she was busy mastering works like Alistair Moore's Henry VIII. I wonder if she ever wore it.
I did.
You did?
I did.
Good.
She got the colours right. She chose beautiful greens, sort of aqua like this in a way. So that was cool.
I do love colour.
I did wear them, but I don't wear shawls. So
So that was big of you. Thank you.
It was.
That was true sisterly love. When I was 26, I really wanted to have a baby. And I was knitting a baby blanket for a pregnant friend. I've got it over here, actually.
yeah, let's have a look at it. I'll hold it up. It's quite gorgeous. So this is the little cap that you stick on the baby's head, right?
A little hood.
Yeah.
With
beautiful.
the pom-pom.
And you've lined it.
I've lined it with silk. I forked out and bought some silk because I realised that the yarn I'd chosen, I just chose it because I thought it was beautiful, was actually too scratchy for a newborn. So I put silk on it instead. And I didn't live here in Byron where it's way too stinking hot to ever wear something like this. I lived further down south in Melbourne, but I had visions of moving to the South Island of New Zealand and cuddling my baby on a snowy mountaintop.
You're a real romantic. It is really beautiful though, and it's gorgeous. So you kept it for yourself and you didn't give it away.
Well, halfway through the project, I fell in love with it. And so I just thought, this is too generous to give away. I mean, each stitch is a stitch of love and it took me hours. So I kept it and I didn't even have a baby yet. So I think I caught her dragon sickness.
I think we have to make a new hashtag dragon sickness
I think
for
you already
selfish
have.
knitting. Yeah.
For selfish knitters.
Okay.
Well, by the time I finally was pregnant, I caught the knitting bug again. And this time I followed some patterns. So I made the usual chevron pram blanket.
Out of cotton, right?
Yes, this one's in cotton, or it might have been bamboo. That's because at the time...
This is the right side. We've got to show the right
yes.
side.
At the time I was living in Ubud in Bali, and it was way too hot to use wool.
You were really fantasizing about being a mum, weren't you?
In fact, I don't think we ever used it. We certainly didn't have a pram. The streets in Ubud are way too rocky and full of potholes to ever use one. And I just wanted to be the ultimate mum who makes a blanket for her baby.
Yeah, she's the domestic goddess, my sister. Okay.
And then I made a large, oversized sock, which I would slip baby in to use as a swaddle. This one we definitely used. Though
It's very cute.
Simba was sweating.
Well, Simba turned out all right, as you can all see. So you didn't fry her brain.
No.
But yeah, it's cute. It's very cute.
That was my first time ever knitting on the round, and I wouldn't be able to remember how to do it now.
Yeah, so you did follow a pattern for it.
Yes, I was pretty proud of myself.
Yeah, it's cool.
And I made the sweetest little slouch beanie for a newborn. It couldn't just be a normal beanie. It had to be a cool boho slouch beanie. And I did have it ready to show you, but my 3-year-old's nicked off with it somewhere.
Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly insert a little photo here so you can see it. It is very cute. Mind you, baby's wearing nothing else because it's too hot.
When I heard the devastating news of Andrew's health, Simba and I, my eldest daughter, we started to binge watch Fruity Knitting episodes. And in a way, I suppose it made me feel closer to my family who were so far away. And pretty soon, Simba decided she wanted to knit her very own first garment, and I did too. So Andrea assured me the Devote by Kim Hargraves would make the perfect first project.
Yeah, see, this is the curse of knowledge. Andrew always told me about this, that when you know something and you've been doing it for a long time, you completely forget about what you know and what other people don't know. And so, I think, well, it's garter stitch and stocking stitch. It'll be a breeze.
Well, at least you believed in me.
I did. I had a lot of faith in you. And I was justified because it's gorgeous. You've done it.
It is gorgeous.
So how did you go with it? Tell us.
Well, trying to read a pattern from a traditional magazine like Rowan, or just a traditional pattern in the first place, was like trying to learn a foreign language. I spent hours decoding the abbreviations. It wasn't as simple as looking it up in the back of the book.
Yeah.
Here's an example of an instruction that would completely melt my mind. Okay. Deck once at front slope edge only of next 9 rows, and at the same time,
It's capital letters, so it's shouting at you.
ink once at side seam edge of second and fold 1 alt rows, then on 6 fold 4th rows, then on 3 fold 6th rows, then on fold 8th row, ending with a RS row. 43.
See, I mean, I just completely forget that fold is not obviously following or is not obviously stitches, and deck is not obviously decrease.
To top that off, I had no idea how to keep track of which row I was up to.
Yeah.
I enlisted the help of you,
Yeah.
my mum, even my niece Madeline, and I decided to rewrite the entire pattern in a way that made sense to me, which was line by line.
Yeah, you've got to quickly show it.
Okay.
It's pretty funny.
Well, I made up my own code. So the knit stitches were love hearts and the purl stitches were seeds, and the arrows indicated whether the increases and decreases were on the left or right sides. And this way I could keep track of where I was up to and where I was going. I just thought it was brilliant. I can't believe publishers and designers don't use this method themselves.
Yeah, so Fiona's idea is to take a 2-page pattern and expand it into a 30-page pattern.
It's beautiful. It's all laid out for you and you can tick it off as you go along.
It is pretty cool. It's pretty impressive that you did this.
I know, but
That shows ultimate dedication.
I was focused.
Yeah.
But I
look at
suppose,
this page.
I know, it's busy, isn't it? Taking after my big sister, I dived right into modifying my garments. I'm 6 foot tall and I have a long torso, so I increased the length in the body and the sleeves of the ribbing section, and because of this, I did a lot of frogging, which was very frustrating, until I discovered the beauty of a lifeline.
Dental floss. That was in a fairly early episode, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
I soon found my groove though, and I got such a kick out of learning new skills which I'd always thought were way out of my league, like the mysterious short rows and how to seam using backstitch.
Again, like to me, when you've been doing that for so long, short rows don't sound mysterious, but I can imagine that it sounds really a much bigger deal than what it actually is. Yeah.
It was. I also learnt a valuable lesson. Always knit with good lighting and knit using lighter colours. I got a bit of a scare when I noticed my long distance eyesight had deteriorated.
Yeah. Well, when I saw her knitting, she was often knitting in sort of dim light, and imagine doing that with this colour. Like, it's a perfect way to lose your eyesight.
Well, it's come good again now after a big break from
Yeah.
knitting, but I've got to remember to look up while I'm knitting so I can exercise my eye muscles so they don't get stuck in one point of focus.
Yeah, I'm also going to teach you how to flick, I think. Yeah.
I've moved on to lighter yarn and I bought myself a portable knitting light.
Yes.
And I bought one for you too, Andrea, so we can be matchy-matchy.
I know. They look like a great idea, but actually
They don't work very well.
I know. The light is so weak, isn't it?
It is.
But it's still pretty cool, and we look pretty cute sitting.
It was a fun
knitting,
idea.
Yeah, knitting with our lights on.
Yeah, so overall, the garment took way longer than I wanted it to. Kudos to you if you're a garment knitter, you've got stamina.
Yeah.
But I'm stoked I stuck with it because nothing beats the feeling of wearing something I created with my own hands, and I just know I could never buy something that fits so well and feels so luxurious.
Yeah. So even though it is completely stinking hot here, I did take some footage of Fiona modelling her devote, and we took this in a little strip of bush that separates Fiona's house from the beach. So that's coming up now. So you can just see what a fantastic job she actually has done on her very first project, or very first garment. It looks really fantastic on her, fits well, and the knitting looks stunning. So you've done
thanks.
Yes, you've done a really great job. I think you have. That's coming up now, and straight after that is a very short extreme knitting segment where you'll see Simba's latest garment, a beautiful blue vest, also modelled in the bush. Welcome back. We are so proud of Simba's beautiful blue vest with the pretty silver clasps. I think she looks gorgeous in it. And did you also notice the 2 knitted folk bags that the girls were wearing as they were walking in the bush? So they're the bags that Madeline knitted them. The girls love their bags, and I think they're just perfect crafting project bags, aren't they?
They are.
Little Leia carries hers around and collects all kinds of things, including some of my camera equipment, and stows it away in there. I really have to watch her. Anyway, and do you remember these 2 vests that I knitted for the twins? Here they are, just to hold one up quickly. They were also really well received. Here are Torvi and Freya wearing their vests. The twins are putting on a lot of weight, which is really fantastic, but there is still a good amount of growing room. And I think when winter comes, the vests will be fitting them perfectly. So Fiona, they have to wear them every single day to get enough wear out of them, unless you're planning on having another set of twins.
Well, never say never.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so the pattern is from the book Aran and Nordic Knits for Kids by Mutton Story, and the folk bags is also from that book. And I've knitted the 6-month size for the vests, and the yarn that I used was the Sandness Baby Wool, which is 100% merino, and it's machine washable, but you do have to put it on a cold wash. So now we're up to under construction with me, and with everything that's been going on, I haven't actually done that much knitting. So you might remember in the previous episode, I started a new project, a lacy cardigan, which was going to be a present for Fiona. Well, back then in that episode, I had already completed the back, and I fully expected Madeline to be Fiona.
Happens all the time.
I know, I go through all the names of our family before I get to Fiona.
It's a family trait.
It's an Olsen trait, isn't it? Yeah. So I expected Fiona to be sitting here wearing this completed lacy cardigan.
In this weather?
Well, at least for 2 minutes. I was expecting it to be finished and for you to be able to show it off. But unfortunately, I've only added 2 front pieces to the back piece that I showed you back in Germany. So there it is. I have sewn it up though. And I was a little bit concerned about not having that much to show you and talk about. And then Fiona, who has recently watched all of the Fruity Knitting episodes, she's now more familiar with the early episodes than I am. And she suggested that I should reintroduce the segment, What's Your Excuse? So this is a segment that we introduced in the early episodes for Andrew. And that was because back then he was working a full-time job, and then he'd come home in the evenings and he'd work for a couple of hours on Fruity Knitting, and then he would all weekend he'd be working on Fruity Knitting, which really left him very little time to do any knitting himself. And back then he was an absolute beginner, and you'll also remember he had a wonderfully slow Zen way of knitting. So he felt that we needed to introduce a segment where he could regularly excuse himself. Okay, so what's my excuse? Well, my biggest excuse, I'd have to say, was that I flew to Australia on Emirates Airline, and they don't allow you to have knitting needles in your carry-on luggage. So just imagine this. I leave my home in Frankfurt 10:30 a.m. on Thursday the 30th of December, and I arrive here in Byron Bay 6:40 p.m. on Saturday the 1st of January. So that's almost 3 days. I'm sitting doing nothing and I can't knit a stitch. I could have actually finished the whole cardigan.
That must have been torture.
It was. I did watch a lot of movies, but it was. I thought I could really get it done. So excuses are boring. I do have a few more, but we'll leave it. So just to remind you what this beautiful project looks like, here's a picture of it. So the design's called Snowfall. It comes in Kim Hargrave's book Winter, and I'm using the Rowan Alpaca Classic in the colourway Berry Sorbet. And this colourway, I love it because the name is exactly so descriptive. It just looks like a fresh berry sorbet, doesn't it? Okay, so Fiona's body shape has fluctuated, which is very natural after giving birth to twins. So when I picked the size of the design, I picked a size that was going to be slightly bigger than what she would wear pre-twins. And then since coming here and measuring her, the only real adjustment I needed to make was, actually, do you mind holding it for me?
Sure.
Thanks. Was to lengthen between the underarms and the shoulders. So that involved a little bit of ripping back. So that's another excuse, because this yarn, because it's got some mohair content in it, wasn't the best to rip back. But that was pretty easy. I just ripped it back and added some extra length. It's going to be a little bit more tricky to recalculate the sleeve cap so that it fits in beautifully into that added length, but it's still doable, no problems. So there it is. It's very beautiful. It's going to look stunning on you. Doesn't she look absolutely pretty in pink? You know, there was a movie in the 90s called Pretty in Pink.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's an American teenage movie, but I think it's slightly better than the normal ones. Okay, so you all know that I'm a lover of the colour green. Fiona is a lover of the colour pink. You can see that with our fingernails. We've been having some girly fun. But pink and green actually do go very well together, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
Complementary.
Very complimentary. So coming up now is our maker segment where you're going to meet the textile artist Robyn Alexander. Robyn lives in a beautiful Australian styled home. It's a weatherboard house and it has a very deep wooden veranda that goes right around it to keep the scorching Australian sun and the heat out of the house. Her husband's a builder, so it's a very beautiful house. And the house is surrounded by a gorgeous garden, and in the garden is her art studio, and that's where we filmed this segment. And Robyn did warn me that also living in this art studio was a large goanna, and that I shouldn't be alarmed if while we're filming it should poke its head out from around one of her crafting baskets. Now, if you don't know what a goanna looks like, if you don't see its body or its legs, and you just see the long neck and head, it looks like a big snake. So I am so glad it didn't pay us a visit. I wasn't up for that kind of excitement.
Maybe the audience don't know what a goanna is. It's a lizard.
Yeah,
Huge
it's a lizard. It's a big, big lizard.
The biggest lizard.
So it looks, yeah, it looks a little bit, or except for in Bali, they've got those, what are they? Massive, they look like they really come from a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're dragons. So it's probably about this big, right?
Bigger. That's the body, and then there's the tail.
Yeah, so their heads are long. And if you just see the head and neck, it looks like a whopping big snake. So I'm so glad I didn't have that excitement. Anyway, enjoy, Robyn, and we'll see you on the other side.
Hi, I'm Robyn Alexander, an enthusiastic maker and a textile artist. Even as a little girl, I collected coloured pieces of paper and fabric with texture and made things. As an adult, I was able to attend our tertiary college called TAFE and did commercial needlecraft advanced certificate. This was like an old-fashioned apprenticeship, 3 years, part-time. We studied hand stitchery, machine stitchery, colour, design, marketing and merchandising, and had to put on 2 large exhibitions each year at a commercial gallery. During this time, I really wanted to find out what was in me and what was my creativity, so I applied myself. I always loved the exotics of India and the Middle East, the colour, the texture, their patterning, their architecture, and I tried to bring that into my work. So I applied myself, and I wanted a job out of this too. So halfway through that course, I went overseas and I found myself in London in this one trade store in this huge craft show. Well, every bell and whistle went off in my head. There were baskets of threads, old pieces of sari, textiles, every sparkly thing that I loved. And I thought, this is what I want to do. So I came home and I did it. In 1994, I started a business called Colour Streams, and I hand dyed silk embroidery threads, ribbons, fabrics, felting supplies, and wrote patterns and made designs, and ended up teaching all around Australia and New Zealand. And I met the most marvellous women, many who are my friends to this day. I also continued to travel and visited India many times and collected all those treasures that really came home and, complemented my products. And one time I brought home 69 kilos of sequins, the best sequins you've ever seen. In my workshops, I'd had women that were at all different levels of skill and ability. One thing I maintain is that they need to find their sweet joy spot. This will cause them to play and continue in their craft. Very early on, ribbon embroidery was all the craze. And this was my ribbons, Colour Streams Women's, in action. And you can see that they really give all the antique look. Little pansies, woven spiderweb rows. This is a very traditional piece, but it's my personal needle case and it's 21 years old, so it's still going well. In this piece, I really love to layer up things in the background. I want to create that texture again, so I put lace in the background. This is dyed lace, and that texturizes it. Up here, I've got bullions that had 120 wraps on the needle, which made it quite a challenge. And again, woven spiderweb rows, just layering. And because the ribbons are multicoloured, it brings a real interest to the piece. And of course, these little baubles here, I've used my sequins and all sorts of bullions and things. They start off in a circle. I embroider the circle, then draw them up around a bead. And similarly, I've done this. This is a machine embroidered piece, and I've finished it with lots of hand stitchery on the flap, and also made these baubles. Can you imagine a necklace out of these baubles as well? This piece here is a more modern piece, and I've just played. It's me trying to change my track a little bit. So in here, I've wrapped bullions all around the edge of this. Drizzle stitch, which is like a little coil, and put a bead on. It's quite dribbly. Really fun piece. I did this when I was camping. One of the things I love to do, as seen here, I use lace in the background. Well, this lace can be painted too. Now, here's this lace. Now, this is polyester lace. Who wants to use that? I do. We want silk usually, but this is what happens when you paint it up. It becomes very antique if that's what you're after. You could dye it bright, but I really love this look. And it's got this little ridgy feel to it, which can capture different colours if you wish. I've used that lace here in this piece. This is called Illuminated Fragments. And it's out of Corinthians in the Bible about love. So there's the big L. And I've used this lace everywhere behind it. And behind the lace, I've put another colour because that will shine out through the holes in the lace. It's a very effective thing to do, that painting. Another technique because I needed to bring these things to the advanced students. They needed to be taken on and inspired. So this piece, I've used fusible webbing, which is a cobweb fine glue. So I've ironed on gilding papers to the top of that webbing, let it cool, then rub off the excess. Then I have painted this fabric and I ironed the other side of the webbing onto it. And it's just created a very antique look, and gilding papers come in many different colours, so you can really play with it. It can be created like that effect, oil on water. Brilliant stuff. I've always really loved wool. And back in the 70s, last century that is now, I used to spin wool straight from the fleece into yarn, knit jumpers and sell them. Well, now I live in the subtropics and it's just too hot for doing all that. So I've turned that love of wool to felting. And what I like to do, I like to start with a pre-foot felt, which is just wool that's mashed together and not strong and in a pattern form. This allows me to layer up yarns, fibres and needle felt it, and then I can embroider into it. It's stable enough. So I'm always thinking about what texture I can create. So this here is a bag, an evening bag, and I have needle felted wool to the back of it. And this is my hand-dyed silk velvet. Now I've killed this by putting it through hot washers to get the remaining dye out of it, and also through the clothes dryer. So it's not going to shrink any further, but because the wool is attached, the wool shrinks, the velvet has no choice except to pucker. It comes a bit like brain coral. Similarly, I've done that with this piece here. So this one, I've felted a collar and used all sorts of fabrics, fibres, yarns, embroidery, lace. It's a sampler, so people will have a reference. This was a really good fun and laborious class. The inspiration for this was Van Gogh's haystacks, because he gets so much movement in his work, those lines that are going like that. It's probably his tortured brain doing that. But anyway, I made that happen here by the same process of needle felting wool to the back of hessian, and it shrunk and created that wondrous texture. Taking it on and playing a little bit further, I have my own workshop bag here. Now, I so enjoyed doing this. I had time to do it. So once again, I started off with the pre-felt, and then I've added all sorts of fabrics stitched underneath, and then continued to lay more fibre and lace. I'm wanting texture, remember, I'm a texture queen. I've appliqued velvet, crinkle silk chiffon to make these flowers and embroidered into it. Now, one of the really positive things of felting is that you can't quite control the outcome. It's a very freeing up thing, and I still need to be freed up after all these years working in it. So when I unwrap this parcel, you're really excited because you've worked for days and days and days doing this. Unwrap it and out comes this magnificent fabric. So it's very painterly, you know, the embroidery's embedded. This is how it's come out of the water. The silk has attached well. It's so painterly, and impressionistic. In 2017, I sold colour streams to Chris Noski and travelled around Australia with my husband for 2 years. During that journey, I collected many textile pieces, linens, napkins, doilies, tablecloths, and I loved the work that these women, our foremothers, had done. They created these pieces as decorations and functioning pieces for their homes. They're no longer fashionable, but I really love them. So when I got home from the trips, I just can't keep out of the dye pots. So I dyed up a few different colours, also painted dye into them, and made packs called Vintage Honour Cloth. And I really do honour those women. So here's an example of one of them. Now this is probably the laciest one I have. I'm still working on designs and I've got a lot of colours to use. Some are a bit wild. So this is your traditional circular doily, but I have stitched into it. This one is needle lace here. You know, these things take months and years to make some of these. This is just a doily, but because I put it all in blue, it's acting more as texture rather than doily central. I've applicated on. This is quite a more modern look. I like that juxtaposition. And this is what they call slow stitch, which I think is a bit of a joke, all stitching slow. And I've embroidered and appliqued just rough pieces of silk all around it. This piece here, this is one I do when I go camping. I've got to add, it's a bit hard to hold, I've got to add leaves and things up here. I've even printed a silk Australian stamp here, used velvet. This parrot I did by hand in long and short stitch, which is a very old-fashioned thing to do. And again, slow stitching the rough edge fabric. It's such a joy to do. It's wonderful. With these leaves here, I've cut them with picking shears, then I've burnt the edges, bringing it to the side of a candle. Look, you can just keep playing and playing. Up here is a bigger version. So this was a design by Kathy Doherty, and I've Robynised it, of course, and I've used all sorts of bits of fabric that I've got. Some of these things I've had for years and years, and now I'm using them. It's fantastic. So there's a hanky there, beautiful textured doily, but look at this texture here. It's a raised embroidery, so it really lifts up. And I've added my little bits of embroidered flowers, woven this basket here, and appliqued, and again stitched a hummingbird. It's so joyful to handle these old textiles and give them new life while honouring the old. I still have a lot more learning to do. Now I am playing with mosaics and gone right back to the beginning and doing online courses in mixed media as a beginner student. That challenges me, stretches me. We've got to keep doing that all the time. And when I finish enough composition pieces, I want to take that up into stitch again and fabric. That fabric is my first love. So my happy place is to come into the studio, put on a story, grab my project and sit and stitch. It's so meditative. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this, and I really encourage you to get out and play, grab your grandmother's rag bag and just give it a good go.
Welcome back. Robyn is so enthusiastic. The way she talks about creating texture really reminded me of Kay Fassett's passion for colour. So I hope you all feel encouraged to experiment around more and to really take time just to be playful. That's actually one of her most strongest messages when she's teaching workshops, is that we really do need to regularly take the time to be really playful with our craft in order to keep it fresh and alive for us. So Robyn is kindly offering Fruity Knitting patrons a 10% discount off everything in her Etsy shop. She has downloadable PDF patterns, embroidery kits, felting kits, jewellery kits, and an amazing assortment of fabrics, braids, trims, beads, threads and yarns. It's an Aladdin's cave for crafters. She also has hand-dyed vintage doily packs, which can be used as the foundation for fabric collages and patchworks. So it'll definitely be a lot of fun to browse through her shop. Now, back in December, we had a live event with Tammy White from Wing and a Prayer Farm, and we featured Tammy in episode 113 in our Meet the Shepherdess segment. Tammy has a classic small holding farm in Vermont with a variety of fibre producing animals, including many different breeds of sheep, alpacas and Angora goats. And Tammy creates her own blends of yarn, and then she naturally dyes them using plants from her garden. So the audio podcast of our live event with Tammy is available for our Shetland and Merino patrons to download and listen to it whenever you want to at your convenience. And Tammy is offering Fruity Knitting patrons a 15% discount off any purchase from her Etsy shop. And that's really very exciting because Tammy does have a lot of lovely yarn in a variety of weights and plies, both beautifully hand-dyed but also in undyed natural shades. I'd like to remind our viewers that producing Fruity Knitting is my full-time work. Madeline is helping me alongside of her university studies, and there are so many hours go into the preparation and filming of every little segment that go into the episodes. And there's also substantial costs involved. And we are totally reliant on the financial support of our patrons to keep this show going. And that's because we don't sell anything and we don't receive sponsorship or advertising money. We're very independent of that. So we do ask that if you are watching to please support our work by becoming a patron, and you can do that easily. There's a link here on the screen. There's a live link in the description box below. That'll take you straight to Patreon, and it's flexible and easy to sign up, and you can pick your level of support that's appropriate for your income. So we do thank you for doing that, and a huge, big, special thank you to the wonderful, loyal patrons who have kept this show going. Thank you very much.
You know, when I was binge watching episodes with Simba, she kept nagging me every time, "Mom, are we a patron yet?" So I eventually signed up because I figured just because we're family doesn't mean I should be getting it for free.
Simba's a Shetland, isn't she?
She is.
She has to join a live event. That would be hilarious.
That would be.
Okay, so we're actually going to move on now to Bring and Brag because you've got some more projects, finished projects to share.
Well, I've got a couple of projects to share with you. The first one is my beanie. So about halfway through the devote, I decided to take a breather and to tackle another project, one which I thought would bring near instant gratification. I'm definitely not a monogamous knitter.
Yeah.
Winter was coming and I needed a beanie. So I chose Mist, which is another Kim Hargraves design. And I chose it because Andrea had already done a tutorial on it. So I thought it would be the nice and easy option. Well, I was wrong to think it would be a quick knit because each row is done in fisherman's knit stitch and you essentially have to knit each row twice.
Yeah, it's another version of brioche, really.
This gives it an interesting fish spine-like texture and makes it extra bouncy and thick. The pattern calls to knit it straight and seam it up at the end, so there's no shaping with decreases around the crown. I ended up ripping it out 3 times because I couldn't see how it was going to fit the diameter of my head. So, suspecting I had a sizing issue, I took the whole project off the needles and I wrapped it around my head to measure it, and only to discover it was way too small. So I panicked, ripped it out, cast on again, this time in needle sizes 2 sizes bigger, just for the ribbing. And I measured it again and it was way too big. So I cast on a 3rd time in needle size 1 size bigger. And in the end, I should have just trusted the pattern because the ribbing section is looser than I'd like it to be. The problem was I skipped doing a swatch.
Yeah.
So I had no idea if I was on gauge or not. So the moral of the story is swatching saves time.
Yeah.
At least if you're me.
Definitely. But you've got stickability. I am so impressed at how you just stuck through everything and finished it. I would love to model this for you or get Fiona to, but we are just covered in a layer of water here. We've actually got our feet on ice packs from the freezer. So it's not going on our heads, but you've done a beautiful job.
Thank you. The pattern calls for 2 yarns knitted together. The Rowan Kid Classic and the Rowan Kid Silk Haze. I fell in love with the baby pink tones.
Yeah.
This one is, well, one of them's shadow and one of them's floss. But I think it was the twin pregnancy hormones talking that did that.
It is very girly, isn't it?
It is.
And like Fiona said, if you are interested in knitting this hat, I have made a tutorial on it, taking you through each step of the project. So, and you'll find that on the Fruity Knitting channel under the playlist tutorials.
I'm currently working on the Ribblesdale vest by Lily Kate France. It doesn't look like much on the needles now, but that's because it's all bunched up, because I really needed some circular needles that were longer.
Yeah.
I was inspired by Madeline, who talks about it extensively in episodes 115 and 116. Check them out if you want to know more about its construction. I saw them just after I'd given birth to my twin daughters, Torvi and Freya, and I knew that Andrea was planning a visit, so I thought it was the perfect opportunity to tackle brioche while I had my big sister around to fix all my mistakes.
Yes.
I'm using Lily's own yarn.
Let me just quickly explain what's going on here. She's done the whole body and sewn it up, but she's got short circular needles, and at the moment she's working on the ribbing that goes around the neckline, so that's why it's all scrunched in like that.
Make sure you don't lose my stitches.
Oh, absolutely. Okay.
You know, the little waistcoat style vest is perfect for me because I love to wear dresses all year round, and in the cooler months I pair them with little vests. I'm using Lily's own yarn. It's the Axis. It's 90% merino and 10% suri alpaca, and I've chosen the colour Love Number because it's pretty and it's pink.
Yeah, and it looks gorgeous on you. You can just so see that it just suits your complexion.
Summer.
Yeah. It also suits mine because it's got some yellow.
Oh, here we go. Hands off.
My dragon eye is eyeing it.
It's a fun knit with a soft, bouncy texture, and I've learnt quite a few new skills, like picking up stitches around the neckline, brioche stitch obviously, and also the I-cord bind off,
Yeah.
which sounds very fancy.
And she did very well.
But lifelines have been absolutely crucial for me because I find it nearly impossible to fix a mistake in brioche.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to wearing it though. It's going to be super cute.
It's going to be gorgeous.
It is.
Yeah. It's absolutely going to be gorgeous.
As predicted, I can't wait to finish it because I want to move on to my next project.
I know, she already has a few lined up. Since we have viewers from all around the world, I just want to quickly tell you a little bit about the place where I am right now. So Fiona lives in the Byron Bay area, which is about an 8-hour drive north of Sydney on the east coast of Australia.
Yes, it's Bundjalung country, which has been home to the Arakwal, Minjangbal and Widjabul people for at least 22,000 years.
And so Byron Bay is very, very famous for its fantastic long white sandy beaches. It's forested hinterland and cute rural and coastal towns that have very creative and slightly hippie communities. But in more recent years, some Hollywood stars like Chris Hemsworth and Leonardo DiCaprio have bought up large properties in the area. And there's also been some Hollywood movies filmed here. For example, Nicole Kidman's most recent Netflix television series, 9 Perfect Strangers, was filmed here in the hinterland. So, yeah. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, you've got to watch it. You can see that it is filmed here once you know
Nice.
that. Yeah, it is. It's cool. So this is my first time in this area. I've never been here before because Fiona and I didn't grow up here. We grew up south in the Albury-Wodonga area. Then I went to Adelaide and studied, and then I went to Melbourne and studied before going over to Germany. So, and you can just imagine with newborn twins, a toddler, 3-year-old toddler, a 7-year-old, and I'm working every day also on fruity knitting, that we haven't had a lot of time to travel around and do any sightseeing and touristy things. But I do really want to get to some of the gorgeous locations and take some footage for you to show you, because Australia is the country of beautiful landscapes, and I love landscapes, and I know a lot of you do too. Anyway, Fiona's husband, Sebastian, he's German, by the way, no, total coincidence. She didn't meet him through me. She met him here in Australia. He's currently taking flying lessons, and he very kindly took some footage for me in his last flying lesson so that I could show you the coastline of the Byron Bay area in this episode. So here it is now. So I've lived in Germany now for 22 years, and I haven't been back to Australia for well over 10 years. And coming back, I just immediately recognised again how stunning and isolated and uncrowded the beaches are compared to beaches in Europe. So there's over 30 kilometres of beautiful white sandy beaches here in the Byron Shire. And the beaches near the towns are patrolled with lifeguards for safe swimming and surfing. But there's also lots of beautiful isolated beaches and coves to hike around. And there's quite a variety of landscapes as well. So close to the beaches, it's scrubby bushland, and further inland, there's some really beautiful subtropical fat rainforests. And actually, Fiona literally lives a 2-minute walk from this fabulous white sandy beach. Now, the Byron Bay town itself is a mixture of laid-back surfers, backpackers and city dwellers on holidays, and I haven't seen so many racks of swimmers for sale for such a long time, and it actually looks like that's what everybody wears in the street. So there's lots of alternative touristy shops and cafes selling local and organic produce, which is lovely, and the main street goes straight down to the beach, which is appropriately called Main Beach. It's patrolled with lifeguards all year round, so there's lots of families swimming there as well as surfers. And the sun is just so powerful. I forgot to put sunscreen on my shoulders and I got severely sunburnt just in the 20 minutes that I was taking this footage. So when I got home, Simba very kindly went out into the back garden and picked me some aloe vera. This is it here. So I think every back garden in Australia grows aloe vera. It's a necessary staple. So I thought I'd show you some if you're from the Northern Hemisphere, north of the wall. And so here it is. You split it open. This aloe vera has actually been documented since ancient times, like the Egyptian times, as being a very healing plant. So if you stick it on your skin, it's meant to help burns and prevent peeling. And if you eat it...
Yes, you can eat it.
Yeah.
You can pop it in smoothies.
Yeah, it's meant to be good for your digestive system, isn't it? So you can see all this sort of slimy, gooey stuff here. You put that on your, spread that on your skin. It didn't actually stop me from peeling, but I am a redhead.
Only you can say that.
Only I can say that. Only a ginger can call another ginger. Okay, so I did smear it all over my skin, and it does actually feel very soothing. So that's aloe vera if you've never seen it or used it before. Of course, every Australian knows all about it. Okay, so coming up now is our feature interview with the toy creator Alan Dart. You'll really enjoy this. I've made very few toys in my life, but I'm really attracted to Alan Dart's toys because there's so much more to them than just being toys. There's so much detail in them. They're like little characters. And I do want to encourage you that if you don't have children to knit for, I think we all need a nice little knitted character that can sit beside us to keep us company while we're knitting. So to encourage you all to do that, I'm going to start a knit along because we haven't started one for a very long time and we've never done one on toys. So we'll do a knit along on Alan Dart's toys. And to encourage you, Alan Dart is kindly offering Fruity Knitting patrons a 25% discount off all his toy patterns in his online store. There are over 200 knitting patterns to choose from, and they're organised into groups and themes so you can easily find the pattern you want. And he really does have designs to suit everybody, no matter what your hobby is or your interest. My particular favourites you'll hear him talk about are the Cumbrian characters. In particular, watch out for Alfie Unsworth, the hedgehog. He's totally gorgeous. And Major Ditherington Flight, the pheasant. They're hilarious.
You can always knit one for your nieces if you like.
I could. I might be particularly attached to it. Look at this slime. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It is.
I just don't want to get it on my skirt. I'll just put it down here. So now, though that knit along will be held over in the Fruity Knitting Ravelry group, but also in the Patron Community Forum, which I'm really happy to say that Madeline has succeeded in getting up and running. So that's exciting. Now, I have also been knitting so many Kim Hargraves designs, and Fiona has, I think, booked up 3.
I'm fangirling.
Yeah, Kim Hargraves. So she wants some company while she's knitting Kim Hargraves, and she has asked me to set up a knit along for Kim Hargraves designs, and since her wish is my command, I'm going to do that. So if anybody...
I should take advantage of that.
If anybody wants to join in, grab a Kim Hargraves design and keep Fiona company, you'd be very, very welcome. So we've got 2 new knit-alongs that'll both be in the Ravelry group and the Patron Community Forum.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's time for us to say goodbye now. So thank you so much for spending time with us in Australia.
Lovely to meet you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Welcome to Fruity Knitting. Today we're right at the top end of the beautiful county of Cumbria, not far from Carlisle. And joining me is the UK's premier toy designer, Alan Dart.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah. So Alan has been designing toys for over 30 years and he has a portfolio of more than 100 licensed characters, including Wallace and Gromit, Paddington Bear, and many of the beloved Beatrix Potter characters. For 18 years, Alan was the toy designer for Woman's Weekly and then later for the magazine Simply Knitting. His designs are beautiful, timeless, and a real joy to look at. So I'm so pleased to be featuring you on Fruity Knitting.
Thank you for asking me.
Can you fill out my introduction with a summary of your journey to becoming one of the best known and talented toy designers in the UK?
I'll try. Well, I started knitting on a machine when I was 4 years old, and then I learnt to hand knit when I was 6. And then when I left school, I went to art college and studied fashion design, and I did a few bits of knitting in my final year. And then when I left college, I started to design one-off hand-knitted sweaters specifically for people. I was lucky enough to do sweaters for Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, and I forgot his name now.
Oh, the famous English showman. What was his name?
Oh, what, Danny LaRue?
Yes.
Yes, that was actually the first magazine feature where I had to make a his and hers sweater. And leading on from that, my magazine saw my sweaters, and they asked me to do things for magazine features. But of course, hand knitting is more popular than machine knitting. So I did lots of hand knitted sweater patterns for different magazines, and they found out that I could do other crafts. So for years, I did loads of different crafts. I mean, lots of hand crafts, needle crafts, and it gradually narrowed down to being toys. And then Woman's Weekly invited me to become their toy designer and put me under contract. So I was there for 18 years as their toy designer doing fabric and knitted toys. And then towards the end of that, Simply Knitting approached me and asked if I would be their toy designer. So for 11 years, I'd had a toy in Simply Knitting every 4 weeks.
Okay.
And then just 3 years ago, I just thought I'll retire from doing magazine work because I'd just done it for so long, and now because I have a website, I now just concentrate on designing things for my website.
Yeah, that's a lot of toys you must have done.
It is, yes. A lot of Christmases.
Exactly, yes, all of the seasons. And you also did a little stint on television too, is that right? Children's television.
Yes, that was, I made sort of handicrafts for children, just using stuff you can find around the house. But I didn't speak at all because the idea was it was going to be sold all around the world. So you wouldn't need to dub it into a different language.
Okay.
So I did, I think, 36 for a program called Rubber Dub Tub. And then I did 52 for a program called Pop's Program.
So did they just see your hands or not your face?
The only time they saw my face was because Pop was like a puppet, and I made a mask that looked like Pop, and I had to put it on, and he had freckles on his cheeks, and I had to put paper dots on. But because I had a monitor, it's because you put your finger there, and it's actually there you should be going, because it's not a mirror image on the monitor. So that was. That was the first time I've been the only one and only time I've been seen. No, I think I did actually do a little bit to camera on Rubber Dub Tub, but just to say, watch me next week or something like that.
Oh, how exciting!
Yeah,
so
but I didn't speak, when I was making things at all.
Yeah.
You just had a guitar music playing over it.
So you've actually had real television experience.
Well, I suppose so.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk briefly about the licensed characters. As I said, you've done well over 100 character patterns. So what's the process involved when designing a licensed character that is so well known? And while you talk, I'm just going to show the audience some of the pictures, because when you make these toys, you actually have to send them back, don't you? So you don't
to be
have
approved.
Yeah. So I'm going to show start off with the Beatrix Potter ones, and they can have a look at this, and you tell us about what the process is.
So, first of all, a company has to buy a license to be able to do this. So if it's a cartoon character, you're very often sent things called turnarounds, which are what's given to the animators so they can see what the front and the back and the side and from above and below is like. But when it's things like Beatrix Potter, they don't have anything like that. I think Beatrix Potter and Brambling Hedge, it was literally just the illustrations. So I had to try and work out sometimes what was going on behind some of the characters because there were just no illustrations.
Yes.
So I would draw out the character full size onto my layout pad and I work out the pattern. And also the choice of colours was restricted by the spinner that I had to work with because quite often the company worked in conjunction with a spinner. So I had to just find the closest colours, but they always had to be approved as well by the licensing company.
Okay.
So I did that, and then I just had to make sure I kept putting it on top of the illustration to make sure it was exactly the same, my illustration, to make sure it's proportionally correct. And then at the end you send it in to the licensing company and they either approve it or they don't. And touch wood, I didn't have to change any of them, which was wonderful.
Well, I can see that they're just absolutely gorgeous. So you are not allowed to ask Alan for the patent because he no longer can
so many
sell
people
them.
do.
Yes, I know, unfortunately.
It's sad because the thing is the license has a limited time. So once it runs out, unless the company pays a huge amount of money again, they just can't sell them.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of these are on eBay, but they are ridiculous prices.
Yes, yeah. But I actually think your own made-up characters are very appealing and classy.
Thank you.
So when you are making up a new character, what important elements do you like to incorporate into the design and pattern?
So what I want to do is get away from the general idea that knitted toys are like shapeless objects. And that's why I like to put lots of shaping into all my designs. And for example, when I do something like a fold on top of a hat, I do a garter stitch row there, which gives you a little fold line. So when you have to cut a circle of card that you glue on the inside to add shaping, you've got a line to glue up to. And then I quite often do small pieces of detailing, like this ribbon here, which is made by using the cable cast-on method, which is the equivalent of one knitted row of knitting. So all you need to do is cast on and cast off immediately. But it will only work if you use the cable cast-on method. Other methods just won't work. But I always say that in my patterns.
Yes, that's a beautiful detail for this ribbon. It looks really neat and lovely.
And it always gives a nice firm edge because you can see there it gives rather than like a loopy edge for casting on. It's a nice firm edge.
Yeah.
But it is the equivalent to one row of knitting. So if you don't do that, then the things won't be the right size.
There's a little bit of holly in the hat here. And tiny little buttons.
Yes, little French knots. I mean, you need to know sort of basic embroidery skills. So I usually just use things like French knots or chain stitch, nothing particularly extraordinary. And then for his glasses, I've used two little haberdashery rings that I've just covered by winding with lurex yarn and just sealing the ends with glue.
And a little bit of makeup.
Oh yes, yes.
He's totally gorgeous.
So that's Grandpa Jolly, who is married to Grandma Holly there.
Oh, they're absolutely a gorgeous couple, I can see. And Grandmother's got a little red robin sitting on her arm. I love this. So
this is one of my Cumbrian characters. I did a collection of them inspired by the animals that are around where I live, and we get lots of pheasants. And this is Major Ditherington Flight. Because we quite often see like pheasants run to the middle of the road and then they run back and they're scurrying about. And I often think it's because they're looking for their lost golf ball. So he is a keen golfer. And he's got a golf ball in his hand. He's got his bag of clubs here. And then, for example, when I do things like his legs, they're actually a drinking straw in there that I've inserted to keep him upright.
Yes, yes. Because it's important that they actually stand well, don't they?
Yeah.
Do the cloves, they're stuck in?
They're stuck in.
But there's a little pocket here. It's so many beautiful details.
But then if you didn't want to do the details, you could just leave those off and he could literally just be a pheasant.
Yeah.
You don't have to do all these details. You could even just not do the jacket and he would just be and not do the little collar, and he would just be a pheasant for someone who liked pheasants.
A plain pheasant. But I like his cravat.
Yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous. And just even the little ring around the eyes, is that embroidery done in?
Yes, that's just chain stitch around there.
Yeah, gorgeous. Okay, so...
And again, with these little, I don't know what they're called on the pheasant, but that's just done by casting on and casting off immediately.
Yes.
So it wouldn't work if you did any other method of casting on.
Now, you said something about using hairspray sometimes.
Yes. Well, I actually started when I was working for magazines, because when I saw things in photographs afterwards, they weren't the shape that I'd sent them in, and I've discovered that they played around with the toys before they photographed them. So I now use an awful lot of hairspray, and actually it's very good, because if you spray the toy and you have to pat it in, because otherwise you get little sort of nasty shiny bits shown.
Yeah.
You just pat it in, and then you can just shape it to whatever shape you want it to be and leave it to set, and then it's quite rigid. And especially if you're doing things like embroidery, it's quite good if you coat that bit of the red bit of his eye first and then leave it to set, and it gives you a firm base to do embroidery on. Because with knitting, you can pick up bits of yarn and fluff and things.
That's true. I love all the little bits of detail that you have. Now, let's have a look. We'll put him down here for the moment. This pirate sits very well. What have you done to make sure that
he's got a little beanbag in his bottom.
Okay.
You can get these, they're called PVC beans for bean bags. You mustn't use things like lentils, because people used to do that in the old days, but if it gets damp, they just go all fusty and horrible. So it's just a circle of muslin that you gather round the edge, and then you just put all these beads inside it, pull it up, and you've got a little bean bag. You don't actually have to do that. If you didn't want to go to the trouble of doing that, he'll just be a stuffed toy. But he sits really nicely because he's weighted.
Yes. That's
and again,
lovely.
here, I because his earring is so tiny, it's a little bit of lurex elastic that I've just cut and I've just glued either side. I use clear Yoo-hoo glue, which is what I've always used ever since I was a child, actually.
Okay.
And I find it the best for all work.
Yeah. He's beautiful, really beautiful.
And then to do the blushing on the cheeks, I just use like a soft, they're actually pencils that they call watercolour pencils, so you can put water on top and turn them into watercolour on paper, but they're softer than a normal pencil. So you just build the cheeks up gradually.
Beautiful. And what about his beard and hair?
Yes, well, this is eyelash yarn. The unfortunate thing about if you use a specialist yarn, quite often the spinner's going to discontinue it. So I tend to try and stick to just basic double knitting. But things like eyelash yarn, even if the spinner discontinues this yarn, which is with Sirdar here, there are so many other eyelash yarns you can use. So I think that's fine to use that.
That's great. So just one more design I want you to quickly talk about, and that's this wizard. So I'll hold him up because I'm sure a lot of people would find that charming to
So
knit.
again, I've used eyelash yarn for his beard and blushed his cheeks, and he's got a piece of card in the bottom of him, so he stands up nicely. And a little book that has card in as well. Because it's always difficult if you're trying to do a square shape. If you just stuff it goes round. So you have to put something in. If I hadn't put any card in his base, the base would be like that and he wouldn't stand up properly.
Okay, yes.
When you do use hairspray, it means you can shape the fingers into the shape you want them to be. He's actually sewn onto his wand there, but you can shape them and just leave them so they look into a nice sort of form.
Poses, yeah. Now, you have said that calculating and writing the pattern is what you most enjoy, followed by the knitting and assembling of the toy.
Yeah.
I think some designers might find that surprising because many of them don't enjoy the maths part of it. So could you now take us through your design process?
Okay. Well, I'm lucky because I can imagine things in 3D in my head. So a few days before I'm going to start making a toy, I think about it, and then I can eliminate things and move things about. And I also think about all the colours as well, so that when I come to actually working it out, I know exactly what it's going to look like, and I don't deviate from that at all. So what I do is on a layout pad, I draw out the main shape of the toy to the actual size. And then once I've done that, I take 3D measurements with an ordinary tape measure. So for example, across the hips of Voodoo Lily, I turn it around like that. So I know that's going to be looking down on her. That will be the size. And that's 10 inches. So across there, I write 10. And then with a calculator, I turn them into, I do the same with the rows, with the height as well, all across here. And I turn it into stitches or rows. So because I use double knitting yarn and on 3mm needles, which is actually smaller than the recommended size because it gives a firmer knitting, it's always 6.5 stitches to the inch and 9 rows to the inch. So example, for 10 inches, that's 65, but I like to round things up to an even number, so that's 66. And then because she's going to have a seam up her back, I add an extra 2, so that's 68 stitches. So I do that all the way along. So like for the waist, I've done it and it's come to 26 stitches and 5.5 for the bust. And then I do the same for the rows, so I do it from like the hip down to the base, from the waist up to the shoulder, and I change that by multiplying that by 9. So I'm now, when I've got all those measurements, I then just get my notebook out and I start working out the pattern. Because here I have to have 32 stitches from 64 stitches.
Yes.
So I then work out how I can decrease evenly up to that point within that number of rows. And the same thing, increasing evenly up to this point. And I just do all that and I write it down and then I knit the pieces. And so on Voodoo Lily, I knitted her body, her head and her neck. So those were the basic pieces. But when I come to do things like the turban, rather than measure the drawing, because I've stuffed the toy, I then measure the toy and I write that down and I work number of stitches and number of rows for that. And for Voodoo Lily, she's got hands with separate fingers, and I did develop this pattern quite a few years ago, so I can't really deviate from that much because each finger has to be 6 stitches wide, including a 2-stitch seam turning. So that's in a way that's what governed the size she was going to be.
Okay.
Whereas some of the I try and vary the hands because some people aren't too keen on doing little fiddly things, so I do like mitten hands or some other patterns, but I mean, I do like the hands with fingers. I think it adds a bit of elegance, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So basically, the finest details govern how big the end of the toy is going to be.
I mean, it's mainly just when it's hands, really, because, I mean, for other things, I don't have to do it so it fits a certain
ratio.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, because you can't have the hands too big in comparison, can you? She's totally gorgeous. So are the hands stuffed with anything hard?
No, that's actually hairspray again.
That's hairspray.
Because I wanted her to have that sort of, her fingers looking like that. So I just coated them with hairspray, put them into shape, and then just left them. And then they hardened to that shape.
That's wonderful. And the dog bones around that.
So they have, it's actually Q-tips or cotton bud stems. So that's a thinner stem than a drinking straw.
Yes.
And again, she's got earrings, which are haberdashery rings, plastic haberdashery rings, just covered with lurex thread.
So this is for Halloween.
Yes.
And she's got a good firm base
She's
too.
got card in her base again with the garter stitch row around there. And I like to include seaming as well. I mean, I don't put a lot of seaming in because the wonderful thing about knitting is that you can increase and decrease within a row. Whereas if you're doing it in fabric, you'd have to have lots of darts to get this shape. but I do feel that the seams here and there add a bit of structure to it.
And you can't see it. That's because
that's because I use mattress stitch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, sometimes I had difficulty trying to find where the centre back is because I have to pull it apart to see where the seaming is.
Yes, that is so beautiful.
But that's why I prefer to do flat knitting, because I know a lot of people like circular knitting, but I feel it doesn't add that structure. And also what I don't like is when you're doing something striped, you get that step along the
jogging. Yes. And no, I love all the details. You really think about the tiny details to make it look so perfect.
Well, this is Deck the Decorator, because I did a collection of hobby bears. So they were all jointed, so their arms and their legs can move. And that's literally what you do. You just knit separate arms and legs, completely with no openings at all. You sew those up, and then you attach your yarn to one arm, go right the way through the body, attach it to the other arm, go back again and pull it up so it pulls the arms into the body. The same with the legs. And again, I've used a textured yarn here, but that's another eyelash yarn. But on his muzzle, like they do quite often on Steiff bears, they shave the muzzle. So I just did it with some embroidery scissors. So that muzzle was actually like this, but I cut off all little tufts
That's so good. We have a poodle and he gets shaved here too. So you can see his beautiful eyes.
And I don't very often do this, but I have used toy eyes here, safety toy eyes. So you have to insert those before you make the head up. I mean, you sew the head, but before you put the stuffing in, you have to push it through, and then there's a locking wash that you push at the back to lock it into place. So you can't pull it out at all.
And the paint dripping over the side edge, all of these wonderful little details. They're gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And he's got shoelaces as well. So where do you do your work, and what tools are important for you?
Well, I don't actually need a lot of space. I just have a desk. So I have my layout pad and a pencil to draw on there. I've got a reporter's notebook. I've got a calculator. And then just pairs of needles, scissors, lots of different needles for sewing up, because I have some favourite ones, and then some for doing embroidery as well.
And you also have scales, because you like to weigh exactly.
Yes, because I, quite often on knitting patterns you buy, it just says buy a ball of yarn. But because I use so many different colours in my designs, I think it's unfair to get people to buy a whole ball of yarn for each colour. So what I do before I start knitting is I weigh the ball of yarn, and then I write on the ball band that weight. And then when I finish making the entire toy, I then weigh it again, so I know exactly how much yarn I've used. But I tend to round it up to like the next even number, just if people are slightly looser knitters than I am, they'd have enough. But I think that's fair, really, just to say exactly how much. And some of the things you only need like a metre of yarn.
Yes.
For like if you're doing embroidery or something, there's no point in buying a ball of yarn.
Absolutely. That's great. Okay. So can you give the viewers some quick tips for better toy making?
So what you must do is you must follow the instructions exactly as written, because they're what I use to make the toy you can see in the photograph. So even if it sounds weird to you, just trust it and it will all come out fine, because that's what you can see is what I did. And I always use mattress stitch, which I mentioned before. So it's worth learning how to do that. And you can see if you go online, you can see how to do mattress stitch. And if you don't do mattress stitch with my toys, you have to be careful, because I've added an extra stitch seam turning, so it'll come out bigger if you do an over sewing on it. So you must do mattress stitch, except when I say to use over sewing, which I only really use if I'm doing a brim or something. Rather than if you can see underneath it, you'd see a seam turning, and I don't like that. So I just over sew the edges together, but it always says in the pattern if you have to over sew something, but if not, it's always mattress stitch.
So if you're faithful to the pattern, you'll get a toy that looks just as good as this.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
And then when you're stuffing, you must remember, don't just ram the stuffing in, because I've done shaping, but you could still make it into a round snowball if you wanted to. And I always use the best quality stuffing I can get, and it's called high loft stuffing. So it's very light and very open, but it still adds bulk. If you get a cheap stuffing, you can push it and push it and push it and just keep condensing, and it makes the toy really, really heavy.
Okay.
And it's just not pleasant at all. And before you stuff, just tease it out first like that to get it nice and light, and then stuff it in gradually. So you build up the shape.
Okay.
Say if you're doing like a body, you don't just push in a lot of stuffing. Just put some in the bottom, then put some more, and mould the toy in your hands as you go. And if you're doing something tiny, like if there's a little arm on a mouse or something that you can't push the stuffing in, you just tease out the stuffing, and I use a pair of tweezers and I get hold of it, and then you just wind it around like that, and then you can push it into the arm, hold the knitting and pull that out. And
that's a really good tip.
Yes, because I mean, otherwise, if you're trying to push it down, you'll never get it down. It'll just be like a blob.
Yes, and then the it'll be limp down the bottom and sort of fat.
Really big, muscly.
So as you can see, Alan's toys are not just for children. They're also wonderful as decoration and also as meaningful gifts for friends. So I thought now we could just go through a range of your designs just to illustrate that.
Okay. Well, I think we mentioned before that I did a range of Cumbrian characters. So this is Alfie Unsworth, who is a hiker. So he's a hedgehog. And he's got a little backpack with his sandwiches and flask of coffee and a little hiking stick.
It's
and
beautiful.
again, I've used eyelash yarn for the prickles. And he's got a little Tyrolean hat as well.
Yes, it turns up at the back.
Yes.
And you've done your pearl row here.
Yes, there, yes.
As decoration. Yes, lovely. Okay.
And then this is Mrs. Honeysett. So she's a badger and she's a beekeeper. So she's got one of her bees, her tame bees on her paw. And she's got the wild roses, which she grows especially for the bees. Oh. And here, I don't very often use fabric, but there's no way I could knit a veil.
No.
So I've used a bit of tulle for her net, just in case her bees sting her, but they're usually very good.
They're good bees.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. And we've got a couple more there.
Yes, and here. So this is Yantan Tetherer, and he's a shepherd, and he's a sheepdog. And Yantan Tetherer is how they count the sheep in Cumbria.
Yes.
So he's got a little sack of turnips to bring his sheep in, and his crook, that's actually a drinking straw in there. And then I use a pipe cleaner that I doubled in half and pushed inside the drinking straw and glued it. So then you can bend it round into shape. And it's just wound with yarn. There's no knitting there. It's just I've just bound it with yarn.
Just beautiful. I love his bag of turnips. I didn't know sheep liked turnips.
Yes.
They do.
Well, rutabagas.
Yes, yeah, that's great. And he is a sheepdog.
Yes.
And
we've seen Major Dithrington in flight, haven't we?
Yes, we have. He's gorgeous.
And he's found his golf ball now. So.
And is this a Cumbrian
character?
character?
This is another one. This is Lettuce Burrows. So she has a large family. So she has to go out every day and collect dandelion leaves. So here she's got a little trug. I mean, it's actually a Sussex trug, but she brought it back to Cumbria with her.
She went on holiday.
Yes, she did.
Oh, it's gorgeous. And you've got beautiful embroidery of little roses all over her dress.
But then again, if people didn't want to do that, they don't have to do it. They could just leave it as it is. Or they could do stripes.
Yes, that's great. Okay, so let's have a look at the mice.
Well, I've done quite a few collections of mice. They seem to be very popular with people. And this is one called the Nursery Rhyme Mice. So here we have Mary Quite Contrary with her little watering can and one of the roses from her garden and her sun hat with a little bow around her neck.
That's beautiful.
And then this one is Little Boy Blue. So dressed all in shades of blue with his horn, and a little feather in his hat.
gorgeous.
And then here, that's a pair. So that's Jack and Jill. And they have a little pail.
Jack and Jill went up the hill with their pail of water, wasn't it? To fetch a pail of water.
Fetch a pail of water. And unfortunately, Jack fell down. But this is before Jack fell down.
Yes.
And they're carrying their little pail of water with them.
Very good. Oh, I know this one.
What is she?
Oh, she's little Miss Muffet sat on her tuffet, eating her curds and whey.
Yes.
Along
and the
came a spider who sat down beside her.
So her curds and whey have been dropped, and there's a little dribble of curds and whey coming out from the spoon there.
This is me. I have a phobia of spiders.
But he's friendly, isn't he?
He is friendly. For a spider.
I'll put him over here.
Yeah, put him over there. They're wonderful.
And this one is Little Bo Peep, who's actually looking for her sheep. That's why she looks a little bit sort of...
So she's a bit teary.
Yeah, she is.
Oh,
she's very attached to them.
Yes,
really.
one can understand
She's got a little laced bodice and a shepherd's crook.
Oh, that's wonderful. Good. Okay, so we'll have a look at the pussycats next.
And this is another collection. This is cats this time. So this is Kitty's Knit Club. So this is the leader of the club, and she's bringing all the yarn for her girls to use for their knitting projects. She's got a little basket, little balls of yarn in it.
They're so gorgeous.
And then this one has got carried away rather, because she's knitting a scarf.
That's never ending.
But it's actually gone a bit long. But she's happy anyway.
She's happy.
Yes. And I've used cocktail sticks for the knitting needles with little wooden beads stuck on the end.
Oh, wonderful.
And this pair are actually winding yarn from a skein. So
they're attached.
They are attached, yes.
That's wonderful. I think some knitting clubs will have to put these together.
And then this one's in a bit of a tangle, really.
She's the beginner.
She is, yeah.
Okay. That's wonderful.
And here we have one of my latest collections, which is Great British Bears. So it's the 4 countries that make up GB. So here we have a little... These are all jointed as well, like the larger teddy bear. So here we have England, dressed as a Coldstream Guard. Yeah. And then this is the Welsh one, with her shawl and her little pinny and her lace cap. Yes, and her lace cap underneath it. Then Scotland with his kilt and sporran. And I think this is called a Balmoral hat. It has a little
tail at the back and the kilt.
Little kilt.
That's gorgeous.
And then this is Ireland, all dressed in Erin green, with her laced bodice and a shawl and a little peplum round her top.
Very beautiful.
So I've done a few nativity sets in my time, but I think this is my favourite one because it's done in all natural shades. And actually, if you wanted to not use acrylic yarn like I do, you could use like natural yarns, that are just these colours, which make a really nice collection. So again, we've got all the characters from the traditional nativity scene. And this time I've used little scraps of gold braid just as embellishments that are just glued on.
For the 3 kings and the angel.
Yes, and the caskets and the angel. And again, I've used gold-covered elastic for the halos.
And the donkey has a halter on him.
Yes. And they've all have, the animals all have drinking straws for legs. So that's how they can stand up.
Lovely. Now, show the audience quickly the cat and the witch, because I think some audience members would enjoy making that.
And here we have the witch and cat. And she, again, has got a weighted bottom, so she will sit on your mantelpiece or wherever, and she's got her familiar with her cat. And she had her hair dyed specially lilac to match her outfit. And she also has high-heeled boots, which are little drinking straws in there. And a little bit of Fair Isle knitting there on the top of the hat band. But if you don't like knitting Fair Isle, just knit it
I think
in
that
one
just
colour.
adds to the classiness of the design.
She does actually have bloomers under there, but this is a sneak preview.
Okay, they are all so adorable. You can fall in love with each one of these characters, and I'm sure the viewers will have done that during our interview. So just one last question. You have received over the years a lot of fan mail from knitters. Are there any interesting stories as to what people have done with your designs?
Yes, well, I hadn't realised toy knitting is very big in South Korea, and there's a lady who got in touch with me and said, could I send over all my toys for an exhibition? And then we worked out it was going to be too problematic to send them all over to South Korea. So they actually made them, the knitting group made a lot of my toys, and they had an exhibition of my work over there.
How lovely.
Yeah.
That's really lovely. Well, thank you so much for inviting us here and talking about your work. It's just a gorgeous collection, and you know, I've never made toys, but I certainly want to try out some toys as decoration or as meaningful gifts, because you can pick a little toy like you've got the decorator and a painter or a gardener and give it to somebody who enjoys that hobby. I think that's a great idea. So thank you for being on Fruity Knitting.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking me.
Good.
Thank you.
Let's say goodbye to the audience. Bye.
Bye.